Sure, the Fate series is prone to capitalizing on fetishes and joking around with its characters, but that doesn't mean it hasn't done a fantastic job serving us a likable assortment of characters who explore profound and diverse gender issues. Welcome back to OtakuDaiKun. Dai here. LGBT representation in media is often a heated topic, as some absolutely demand it, while others insist it should only be done if appropriate to the story or the creator's passions. Thankfully, I can say that the Fate series is genuine. While the process of gender bending so many historical figures is clearly an attempt to produce more hit waifu, the result questions gender roles based on the context of each character. What does it mean for a woman to serve as a hero, yet be remembered throughout history as a man? What would it be like to come from another world and discover you have a male or female variant in this new history? That in itself is fascinating, but for this video, I want to take a look at a handful of Fate servants that I feel offer something unique for us to talk about as fans. We'll begin with perhaps the most straightforward case, Enkidu. As you may already know, Enkidu is significant because they are genderless, first created from mud given life through divine energy. It was Enkidu's mission to restrain the rebellious nature of Gilgamesh. In that regard, Enkidu is not seen as a human, but as a tool or object. They didn't even take human shape until after spending some quality time with the sacred prostitute Shamat. In honor of Shamat's beauty, Enkidu took her form, for the most part. While Shamat was a visibly gorgeous, well-endowed woman with long, silky hair, Enkidu's rendition of her wound up much more androgynous. They lack a woman's chest, but maintain the fair complexion and hairstyle. This form isn't permanent either, as Enkidu can change it when necessary. While it's tempting to imagine what this implies in the bedroom, we'd be doing Enkidu a disservice to try and understand them on our biological terms. Their relationship with Gilgamesh is a fair example. While Fate says Gil and Enkidu were close friends, and doujins clearly show them as more physically intimate, I feel it's safe to say their relationship is more profound than words can adequately describe. Just as Enkidu simply is Enkidu, their bond with Gilgamesh needn't be confined to traditional dating logic. Just like the bond between Shinji and Kaoru from Evangelion, their relationship appears transcendent. Saying they're just friends, or are boyfriend and clay, just don't quite do the trick. Regardless, Enkidu is a character who is very compatible with various gender identities. Women, men, gender fluid, and non-binary fans can cosplay them, and the character has been voiced by both men and women between the Japanese and English dubs. Because none of their features are too outstanding, it's quite possible for males and females to effectively look like them. To top it off, there's no real community drama surrounding the character as far as I know, which we certainly can't say for everyone in this video. In contrast, there's Astolfo, who has fans utterly divided over whether he should be considered a trans woman or just a very pretty boy. There's one specific reason people argue for Astolfo being trans, and that's his character profile in Fate Apocrypha. Essentially, the Throne of Heroes records both a hero's legend and their stats, which masters can typically access as their bond deepens with their servants. Like the flirt that he is, Astolfo specifically scribbled out the data on his gender and wrote a secret beside it. This ambiguity is also reflected in his Fate Grand Order profile. While this certainly opens the possibility of Astolfo being trans, gender fluid, or non-binary, it also doesn't eliminate identifying as male from the list of conclusions. Objectively speaking, all this really says is that he's a tease, and for some reason doesn't want the official answer out there for everyone to see. Now, over the course of debates, fans have compiled potential evidence of Astolfo being a guy. His Fate Apocrypha material details use masculine pronouns, as does the Xseed translation of Fate Extella Link, in which he is referred to as he by his honorable king Charlemagne, and apparently even says, "I'm my own man." We've got to be careful about this, however, since Xseed likes to take creative liberties over their scripts, not to inject politics, but to make dialogue sound more exciting. So I dug up these moments from Fate Extella and listened to the Japanese voices. One thing of note is how Astolfo refers to himself by boku, which is traditionally a masculine word. However, as we'll see later in this video, we can't rely on that exclusively to determine gender. For instance, when Charlie says, "he's no scholar," he says "koitsu," which is like saying "that one over there." The line itself doesn't indicate gender. Other times he just refers to Astolfo as Teme, which is kind of a condescending way of saying you. Then there's this quoted line, "I'm my own man." If you listen to what he says in Japanese, it's completely different. He says,
僕はやりたいことしかやらない。
"Boku wa yaritai koto shika yaranai," which roughly translates to, "I only act how I want to." If you're a fan of the anime Denpa Kyoshi, you may recognize this as being almost identical to Kagami-sensei's YD slogan, "Yaritai koto shika dekinai," or "I can't do anything but what I want to do." Not sure why Xseed felt the need to change this, as his next line is actually, "And what I want to do is help the master and my king." So, aside from using boku and the creators using male pronouns, Astolfo himself doesn't actually use overtly gendered speech. This is important, because the defining factor is what Astolfo considers to be his identity, not how others see him. The last noteworthy part I want to look at is in the Apocrypha anime, when Jean walks in on Astolfo and sees his man bits. She freaks out, assuming Astolfo had a female body up to this point. This scene never happens in the light novel. In the English dub, Sieg says, "How'd it take her this long to realize you're a guy?" But if we listen in on the Japanese, Sieg only says, "I didn't expect her not to know." This would have been a chance for Astolfo to deny Sieg's statement if he didn't feel comfortable being called a guy. But again, we're left with English translations saying more than what was originally there. That said, I'm sure this was in good faith, likely clarified by the creator's vision. Apocrypha's author clearly stated Astolfo is a boy, but if so, why would he intentionally mask his gender? My answer is, for the fun of it. Yes, according to lore, Astolfo is said to have lost his sanity on the moon. This isn't a jab at trans people, but rather a reason behind Astolfo's free will and recklessness. He's bubbly and impulsive, a comic relief character in legend who even spent time as a tree. The inspiration behind Astolfo's feminine behavior and attire comes from an excerpt in which he dressed as a woman in order to calm his fellow paladin Roland. It's presumed that the Greater Grail, acknowledging this bit of legend as Astolfo at his peak, likely carried this excerpt over in the form of feminine mannerisms. In life, he was also a ladies' man. Not sure if during his days in France, cute femboys were a hit with the girls, but in modern times I know a lot of guys and girls who go for that, myself included. Personally, I think that Astolfo being a feminine male is awesome. It subverts the idea that men have to look and behave a certain way, out of fear of being emasculated. Here Astolfo is, wearing hotter swimwear than some of the waifu, and doing it as a man. That said, his playfulness also lends to the idea that he doesn't really care much about his gender. He treats people like people, without assumption. If you treat him as a person, instead of an object like his master Selenik did, he's sure to be friendly regardless of what gender you refer to him as. Proof of this comes when Jean asks him if he's in love with Sieg, and he legitimately thinks about it. He's all, "I don't know, what about you?" Even as a ladies' man, he is still willing to consider his affection for Sieg based on the content of his character. If you want to call him gender fluid, sure, but he certainly seems to have no issue being addressed as a boy. So yeah, dressing in traditionally female attire doesn't mean someone's identifying as a girl. This becomes relevant when talking about our next character, Mordred. She too is the subject of debate about whether or not she can be considered trans. Either way, her particular behaviors and perspective raise important questions about gender. Before we dive into her, I want to first detail Artoria, as their situations are remarkably similar. If anything, Artoria is simply better at articulating her feelings rationally. Artoria is biologically female, identifies as such, but doesn't think much of it. In her time, women weren't kings, so when she decided to pull Caliburn, she cast away any hope of living as a traditional woman. Instead, she dedicates herself wholly as a knight and king for her people. Those close enough to her to discover her gender understand this, and as such never make a big deal out of it. She is their king, and they serve her accordingly. In fact, it only proves to be an issue when others use the fact that she's a woman against her, to imply she's weak or shouldn't be on the battlefield. When Iskandar first remarks he didn't expect the King of Knights to be a little girl, she confidently asks, "Would you like a taste of this little girl's blade?" She encounters similar frustration with Shiro, who insists that women should be protected. It's kinda neat, actually. Artoria acknowledges Shiro's chivalry, and instead of trying to change his perspective, she simply asks him not to think of her as a woman, not because she isn't one, but because it's preventing Shiro from seeing her as the king she's sworn to be. If Shiro's gonna get all hot and bothered seeing her in the bath, she doesn't want that distracting him in the heat of battle. It isn't until she begins to realize she's already done a great job as king, and should instead look to the future, that she begins to rekindle her desire to live and explore her femininity as a civilian. Mordred, however, is less clear, causing quite a bit of confusion. Let's go over the reasons why some fans feel Mordred is a trans male. The most obvious is how she abhors any discussion of her gender, displaying clear killing intent to those who call her a woman. She says with no uncertainty that the topic is never to be brought up before her. One might interpret this as Mordred clearly not identifying as female, which is of course her biological disposition, and therefore trans by technicality. I personally don't think it's quite this simple, or rather, calling it so quickly denies us a further look at her character. In the story, there are 2 times Mordred is called a girl and gets aggressive about it. In Apocrypha, Mordred's master, Kairi Shishigo, is surprised to find that his summoned servant appears female. He says, "You're a girl?" To which Mordred angrily orders him never to say that again. When he asks for clarification, she responds, "Call me that again, and I will be unable to restrain myself." Kairi apologizes, and Mordred lets it slide. The anime adaptation is a bit more exaggerated, with Mordred holding Clarent to Kairi's neck as she says, "Next time you call me a woman, I'll be using your throat as a sheath." Either way, the message is clear. Mordred is defensive about being referred to as a woman. In the London singularity of Fate Grand Order, Dr. Jekyll is confused as to how everyone seems to understand Fran's adorable grunts. He suggests perhaps it's because Fran, Mordred, and Mashu are all the same gender. Again, Mordred threatens to kill Jekyll if he says that again. In fact, he immediately retracts his statement, implying he done goofed before. Sure enough, in both cases, it's never brought up again. Interestingly, however, is that the light novel continues to use feminine pronouns to describe Mordred. Is the author disrespecting her trans identity, or are they providing legit insight into how she feels? In contrast, the English version of Fate Grand Order used he/him pronouns in Mordred's bio that have since been patched out. It also says things like, "Don't treat Mordred like a woman, but don't be too obvious about treating Mordred as a man." Then her summer version's bio uses she/her pronouns throughout. Shit's confusing. I don't think we can use the English localization for a definitive answer. It switches back and forth a lot, and let's not forget this is the same team that continues to use Altria instead of Artoria. Online discussion has cited that, in Japanese, Mordred uses the word ore to refer to herself instead of the more traditionally feminine watashi. Surely this indicates she uses more masculine language, but I don't think that inherently pins her as male. The thing is, ore is not just masculine, it's informal. While in real life, women have absolutely no reason to use the term, not even men will use it when trying to be polite. Therefore, a trans male wouldn't necessarily be more inclined to use it. More historically, women referring to themselves as boku or ore are tropes created by characters in anime and manga. These fictional characters, bokuko and oreko, use said terms not to signify their gender, but to be more youthful and rebellious. It's a very tomboyish, wild way for a woman to speak, which is pretty much ideal for Mordred as she's written in Japanese. To play devil's advocate though, we can't forget that Mordred was essentially raised as male. Her identifying as such isn't a stretch. She was born to sabotage King Arthur's reign, and was trained as a knight in order to infiltrate the Round Table. Problem is, in her time, women couldn't be knights or kings. This is likely why she first thought Artoria was male, and continues to refer to her as father, even when confronted by the truth. In Mordred's cognition, female is synonymous with an ineligibility to fulfill her ambitions. Thus, the likely root of her hatred for being called female is that she interprets it as an attack on her worthiness. This is further supported by how Mordred doesn't appear to have any bodily dysphoria. She has no fear of dressing and revealing outfits that show off her body. Sure, she doesn't wear hyper-feminine dresses, and looks quite dapper in a suit, but her short shorts and tube tops aren't exactly masculine either. Do the creators get the final say? In an interview, Nasu states that Mordred is a girl, definitely. A man with that sort of outward appearance is, well, I guess a certain kind of person would consider it a prize anyway. To add, Higashide, the author of Apocrypha, detailed, Saber was originally going to be male like the legend, but it was thought that having 2 male characters look feminine, the other being Rider of Black, was too much. While this sounds definitive, we can't be too hasty on this conclusion either. I suspect that these guys are referring to Mordred's biological sex, and not necessarily her gender identity. Mordred is undeniably female in terms of her body, and she appears to have no shame in that. But technically that isn't an essential factor in her being trans. There are physical and mental reasons for one's identity, both of which can be legitimate. Sadly, listing all of the objective truths about her doesn't give us a definitive answer to how does Mordred identify. She was raised male, but her hatred for being treated as a woman seems exclusively rooted in her desire to be worthy of this sort of selection. As someone on Reddit pointed out, if Artoria would just sit down with Mordred and tell her women can be kings, I'm sure her hatred would subside. Of course, that would require Artoria to actually acknowledge her. I think, at the end of the day, Mordred just doesn't want to deal with her gender. She wants you to accept her as is, and not place any gender biases upon her. A good friend of mine came to the conclusion that Mordred probably hasn't fully settled on a specific gender, which is pretty understandable. I definitely don't think you're wrong for using either set of pronouns, so long as you don't make a big deal out of it, which sadly it seems the fans, myself included, have just done. I think it's important though. Both Mordred and Artoria, in their own ways, teach us that it's sexist to put someone's gender before their roles and abilities. Seeing someone as a man or woman is cool and all, but it shouldn't be used as a basis for discrimination or stereotype. Maybe Mordred could be thought of as gender fluid, though I think it's more accurate to say she just doesn't give a damn. The sentiment is more sincere with our next character, Chevalier Daon. Daon was thought to be born male, yet presented publicly as female as a child. As an adult, they dressed and acted formally as a man, serving Marie Antoinette as Knight of the White Lily. However, Daon was considered so beautiful that they were able to present as female during reconnaissance missions. They own a lovely dress gifted to them by Marie Antoinette herself. Historical accounts claim Daon spent the latter part of their life identifying as female, but Fate's rendition appears to be both male and female interchangeably. They are gender fluid, and are referred to in-game by they/them pronouns. What I find fascinating about Daon is that they have a societal view of masculine and feminine gender roles, but goes out of their way to fulfill both. So far, none of these characters have been straight up trans male or female, but don't worry, Fate's got us covered with Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo was, in life, a brilliant man also considered quite handsome and pretty. Her gender wasn't particularly relevant, but she pursued an ideal beauty found in the form of her painting, the Mona Lisa. Thus, when she was summoned by Chaldea, she appeared in a form very similar to the Mona Lisa, and was quite pleased with the result. To remain in Chaldea, she constructed a duplicate body, a complex doll in child form, to anchor her as a master would. At Chaldea, she appears wholly comfortable being acknowledged as a woman, and the fact that this body was her ideal form, I feel it's safe to declare her undoubtedly a trans woman. Her circumstances are quite unique though. It's not every day you can just imagine the perfect body and bam, suddenly having it. Her ability to just build another body, lowly or otherwise, far surpasses what current medical tech is capable of in reality. In that regard, she's every trans woman's dream. That said, she doesn't appear to have any massive dysphoria for her former self, her name, or the fact that history regards her as a male. She embraces it all, simply admitting she prefers being female. Does that mean she always identified as female? Not necessarily. She's interesting to me, because I would probably feel the same in her shoes. As it stands now, I identify as male. I don't have any kind of dysphoria. I'm comfortable being male because that's how I've always been. My biology is quite masculine. I'm not gifted with smooth, hairless skin and androgynous features. I know looking like a woman isn't necessarily a prerequisite to identifying as one, but I wouldn't say it's irrelevant either. Traditional views of femininity, both culturally and biologically, are what informs certain people of their identity. I don't think any amount of transitioning, medical or surgical, would bring me any closer to feeling like a woman, at least not with the options available to me. And yet, if I were to create my own dream body, it'd be female without a doubt, and I would identify as such in that body. I'm not sure how to categorize that. Would that make me conditionally trans? Like, my personal identity as male or female is dependent upon the physical conditions of my body. It's a feeling I have that defines me, but the rules I use to determine my identity don't mean jack to anyone other than myself. It's fascinating, and I think how Fate characters each have their own approach to gender, what masculine and feminine means to them, has really helped me understand myself and others around me. That's why I dig into their lore, because in order to determine their gender, we have to better understand them as people, which is where the real insight occurs. But I don't know, I suppose I'm just a cis white male. Feel free to call me out if I'm full of crap. Anyway, I thought this would be a fun way to discuss some of our beloved Fate characters, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on them below. Have the gender struggles of these characters resonated with you? Have they been something you find bothersome and difficult to tolerate? As I see it, these characters weren't made to fill a quota, and as such feel completely genuine and well-developed, deepening Fate's lore without virtue signaling or forcing politics down anyone's throats. Good stuff, yeah? Thanks for watching! If you enjoy this channel, help me beat the algorithm by liking, commenting, and sharing the video, subscribing to OtakuDaiKun, and most of all, smashing that notification bell as if it were your waifu. That way you'll never miss out on all of my anime content, lore videos, live streams, and Holy Waifu Wars polls. My vids are struggling to get featured, so that bell is absolutely critical. If you want to support me directly, check out my Patreon, or consider donating via Super Chat. And as always, celebrate your fandom.